Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast where we explore the great books in the Western canon. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker.
And I'm Dr. Junius Johnson.
And we are here today to never grow up.
Something I'm told I'm good at.
That's right. That's right. Talking about an interesting, this is I think a little bit of a shift for us. I'm trying to remember, have we ever done a children's book before?
I don't believe so.
I
was going to say not that I recall, but I'm pretty confident we haven't.
Yeah, so our first time doing children's literature, we're doing the great work of Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. And so Junius, what is your experience with the text?
Now, this is funny because I knew that I had read a Peter Pan before, but I wasn't sure that I had read the J.M. Barrie Peter Pan or if I had read some sort of, retelling or something like that. I don't remember what gave me that impression, but for some reason I doubted whether it was the correct one. And so as I was rereading this one this past week, when I got to the climactic fight aboard the Jolly Roger, I was like, I remember this really well. And there were several specific details that were emblazoned in my brain that confirmed to me that it was in fact this Peter Pan that I read. So I've read it before. I don't remember when that was. I can't even narrow down to was that college, pre-college, graduate school. I don't know, but I definitely had read it before this. I picked it because I have read other things by Barrie, and I was really blown away by how good a writer he was. And I thought, wow, this guy's a much better writer than I was led to expect, and people need to know him better. And so I picked Peter Pan thinking that would be an accessible and justifiable way to draw attention back to him. And I'll comment on Peter Pan in relation to his other work in a bit.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't recall. I mean, it's such a pervasive story. It's hard to remember when one first came into contact with it. I mean, I think I remember the movie from when I was little. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I read, abridged versions of the story growing up, but I don't recall ever reading the Barrie novel. I, of course, saw the Finding Neverland movie starring Johnny Depp and all that, but I don't. And then there was a remake, like a live action movie in the early or mid 2000s. I vaguely remember going and seeing that in the movie theater, but it's just not something I've ever actually read. So it was very interesting to revisit the actual sort of primary source from which all of those retellings come and see how different it is compared to a lot of those adaptations.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was the movie Hook, which I think was late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes.
And then I believe they did a Peter Pan and Wendy straight to Disney Plus, maybe around the time of the pandemic, which I actually haven't seen.
I haven't either.
But I my memory serves, I think they did do that. Like we were all in lockdown when it came out, I believe.
Interesting. Well, I think to maybe frame the conversation, maybe it would be helpful to start with some ways in which the book might be a little different than some of the more popular adaptations of it.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to say about it is it's dark. It's darker than you're used to. My wife listens to it on audiobook and she was like, I don't like Peter at all. Like this character really puts me off. And I think there's a couple of really important reasons why that's the case that we'll talk about in due course. But one of the important things to note right away is that the Peter of the book is a lot younger than the Peter of the Disney cartoon.
Yes.
Disney cartoon Peter looks like he's in his teens, right? Like maybe he's 12 or something like that. And the reality is that the Peter in the book still has all of his baby teeth. So he's no older than 6. And that's a pretty big difference right off the bat. So but it's not, considering that it's very clearly directed at children, and there's several times the narrator speaks directly to children in it. Nevertheless, it is fairly dark, and not just in the fact of there's sort of killing is just sort of taken for granted as this thing that happens, but the themes and what's really going on and the level of tragedy that's there actually is while ultimately it ends happily enough, it gets a lot darker along the way than you would think.
There was also more like I don't know, sort of sexual entendre than I was expecting for it, because obviously, I mean, the Disney movie. I mean, Tinkerbell is blonde and small and attractive, I suppose, but there's like a lot of comments, especially about her being buxom and all these other kind of things that was a little I was a little taken off guard at that.
Yeah, that was fascinating. My wife was like, "Why do they always sexualize Tinkerbell?" And I was like, "Well, because Barrie did it. I mean, that's who she is." Maybe
There's one part where Peter's trying to get her out of her little room in their house, and he's like, "You better come out, or I'm going to open the door, and we'll all see you in your negligee."
and that works.
It does.
I will say, just to clarify for readers who haven't gotten around to reading it yet, when he says sexual innuendo, he means really more like romance. The female characters are all very fixated on romance, in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect.
I actually did mean straight up, sort of like his descriptions of Tinkerbell are. I mean, he describes her bosom and things like that. That's what I was referring to. I mean, you're right about what
I can't save you.
But you are right about the about their fixation with Peter is very interesting too.
Yeah, I think if a child were reading this or having this read to them, not knowing the particular words he uses to describe Tinkerbell being very well endowed are not common words in English anymore, and so I think they probably fly by a child, and they wouldn't really pick up on that. But there'd be no avoiding the fact that Wendy wants to date Peter, and Tinkerbell wants to date Peter, and Tiger Lily wants to date Peter, and Peter, of course, has no idea what they're even talking about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, it can be helpful because I don't know if it's even common knowledge just when J.M. Barrie lived, and so we might want to say a little bit about him. He was Scottish, and he was born in 1860, and he died in 1937. So he's well within our, the modern period, and even I was going to say our century, but I suppose it's not our century anymore. Yours and my century anyway.
That's right.
He was raised to the Order of Merit by the British Empire in 1922. So his life is, the sort of high years of his life. He's 40 years old at the turn of the century, and then he's going to live another 37 years after that, and then he's going to die as German power is ascending in Europe, but before World War II breaks out. So that kind of helps to situate him a little bit. He was deeply interested in children. He did adopt a couple of children after their parents died, and he, at the end of his life, before he died, he gave the rights to all the Peter Pan works to a children's hospital in London, and that hospital continues to benefit from royalties on those rights to this day. So he has a special place in his heart for that. He is immaculately educated and was a man of society. He was not born a noble, but he was raised to a baronet, which is a minor baron, sort of the lowest nobility you can be, in 1913 by King George V. So he was always right on the edges of society, and then he ultimately came into society in his adult years.
So we can say we picked this book for purely altruistic reasons because we knew we wanted to benefit the Children's Hospital. And
that's exactly right. Really, we're primarily concerned with the children. And so whatever we say here, just keep in mind, it's all for the children.
It's all for the children. That's right. That's right. In fact, so you mentioned his educational background, and I did a little bit of a deep dive into some research that's recent research about Peter Pan and the story and everything. And he had a science teacher, Barrie, named Peter Guthrie Tate, who had a really interesting hypothesis, which is that there is a kind of unseen universe, which the author of one article that I was looking at called A Fantasy Space of Thermodynamics. And in the novel, you almost see him playing with that cosmology in Neverland, where there is a kind of alternative energy that occurs, right? I mean, there's not like thermodynamics in the way that we would experience them here. Peter doesn't age. There's no growing. And also Peter and Tinkerbell are always very frenetic. They're always moving and always kind of defying entropy, which is really interesting. So I thought that was I don't know how much that's maybe reading too much into the story, but I thought it was a very interesting that he had this professor, and then he uses that cosmology to help shape Neverland.
Yeah, but maybe that's a good place to start is with Neverland itself. Neverland is a place that every child dreams of and imagines and plays in, and he connects it very explicitly on their first sight of it to the island of their make-believe. And so when they first arrive, they recognize all of these different aspects of it. Oh, and there's your, that toy that you had that was, there it is. And like, this is where the lagoon is, where these are things happen and whatnot. And Peter's kind of annoyed at first that they recognize Neverland and kind of know more about it than he does in some ways. But then the sun sets and darkness comes over Neverland, which children don't see in their make-believe. And it becomes a very sinister island when the sun sets. And this is the reality of it. And in that moment, they learn the difference between a make-believe place of adventure and a real place of adventure, because adventure always means danger. And it's sort of synonymous in this story when he says, no, the children had adventures, it means that they were placed in dangerous, life-threatening situations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this is the time aspect, because immediately a reader might think of like how Narnia is sort of an opposite or a parallel world or whatever. But the difference is that in the story of the Chronicles of Narnia, time kind of stops when the children are away, right? So when they come back, they've not really missed any time. Whereas here, you've got the Darling family wondering where the heck their kids are for a long time.
Yeah, they're mourning a lot for their children. And we even start with that before we even get to the adventures, where we see Mr. and Mrs. Darling and Nana, the nurse, who is a dog, and mourning the loss of the children and looking back on the events of that fateful night, and wishing they had done all these things differently long before we even see the kids gone. One of the things I noticed that I had not remembered was that the journey to Neverland doesn't take one night. Like it does in the Disney movie, right? I mean, they're days and days and days on the way there. And the famous, second star to the right and straight on till morning. And then Barrie says, no one could have found Neverland with these directions.
Yep. Well, and that's why they're worried, because they're worried at a certain point on their journey there because of the way Peter starts acting, where he leaves them behind and then he'll come back and he will let them fall until the very last moment and then he'll catch them. And Wendy's kind of like, hey, guys, you have to be nice to him because we can't get back without him. There's no way for us to know where the heck we are.
That's right. We can't go backwards or forwards. We don't know how to get to Neverland from here. We don't know how to get home. And so, if you're thinking, oh, if I could only fly, I just hit the first star to the right and straight on till morning. That's not going to get you there. And it's not till morning. It's going to be many days later before you get there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot of these little things, and we'll probably be pointing out a lot of differences along the way because the differences are noteworthy. But it's let's see. So Neverland is a very different sort of place, and Neverland's character is really keyed to Peter Pan. It's in it because it's the land of all of childhood imagining. Our make-believe worlds are Neverland, but the engine that drives Neverland is Peter Pan. He says that Neverland's a very sleepy place while Peter's gone, but as soon as Peter comes back, then it wakes up and everything gets set in motion again. The Indians sort of sit around just eating food while Peter's gone, and they get kind of chubby. But then when Peter gets back, they go on the warpath again, and they get to moving around and this sort of a thing. So there's a really close relationship between Peter and Neverland, which maybe is something we need to talk about when we talk about Peter's choice at the end of the story.
Yes. And I think one other thing to point out is the imagination, because the island is based on the imagination of the children, it very much mirrors a sort of 19th century European English mentality, right? So you've got the children, of course, the Lost Boys, but then the other inhabitants of the island are these natives and pirates, which in the English, as the sort of imperial power of the time, those are the kind of main threats or bogeymen, who are kind of on the outs of society, on the margins of society, and
right.
So that's why they're always there, and so there's always this kind of game, right, where the pirates are hunting the children, the natives are hunting the pirates, and they're constantly going around in circles on the island, trying to find each other.
Yeah, and the wild animals are hunting the natives.
That's right.
It's also interesting that the like I remember growing up, we played at Pirates and we played at Cowboys and Indians, as we said back in the day. I think perhaps our generation was the last generation to at least play Cowboys and Indians. But Pirates are still very much alive, and so it's very fascinating. These are, yes, I agree. These are the major dangers the British Empire faces. But at the same time, they're also the things that children play when they set to playing. When they want to add danger or conflict into their struggles, they reach for pirates and for natives, right? So that's really fascinating to me as well. The Lost Boys are like Peter in that they're also not aging. And they don't age because they choose not to. And that's also why Peter doesn't age. It's quite possible that Peter could age if he, well, at the end, the Lost Boys forsake Neverland, and then they age as normal, and presumably the same thing would happen to Peter if he did it. I think maybe it's a good time to dive into Peter's character a little bit and kind of what's going on with him. And that'll kind of set us up for some larger topical discussions and connecting it to other literature and things. So Peter is probably no older than 6. He's very, very young, and he doesn't have a mother. The whole point is that the Lost Boys are all living on the island without a mother. Furthermore, all of the Lost Boys do everything Peter says because Peter gets cross with them and will even whip them if they don't do it. And so Peter is, and this is why my wife didn't like the character, he is a spoiled brat. He's thoroughly spoiled. And part of what you have to keep in mind is that he is only 6. And so he doesn't know very much. And he has that childishness that makes you want to pretend that you know when you don't, and makes you irritable when somebody shows that they know more than you do. Right.
And it's also what makes him so cocky, right? Because that's Hook's main problem with Peter. Why Captain Hook hates Peter so much is it's not anything other than he's just really cocky.
Yeah, he's an annoying show-off, know-it-all brat, right? and as you're reading it, you're kind of like, yeah, James, you've got a point. Right?
I get it.
Like, I mean, Hook, you're not entirely wrong. And any child half as naughty as Peter is ought to have been whipped by their parents at this point in history, and maybe still today. And that is exactly Peter's problem: is that there is no one to curb him, right? That what a mother would have done to curb his desires, teach him how to focus them well, that's not happening. And in addition to that, he can't make any real long-term memories, because if he remembers things, his store of experience is going to make him grow up. He can only stay at the quote-unquote innocence, and he makes this innocence look very non-innocent, of this young age by not remembering things. And he says at the end, a year after he kills Hook, he doesn't remember who Hook is. And Wendy's surprised by this, and he says, "Oh, I forget him after I kill him. You know, once I've killed you, you're dead to me." You feel, pardon the expression. So, and there's several. He keeps forgetting who Wendy and the boys are and whatnot. And I think that's necessary to his being an eternal youth, because otherwise his mind at least would grow up under the weight of his accumulated experience.
And it's interesting you mentioned that about him not having anybody to sort of curb him or provide discipline. Because the one thing he wants is, well, the Lost Boys want it, and he's okay with it too, is, Wendy being a mother figure.
Yeah.
And yet at the end, I mean, spoiler alert, when she's old, he's mad at her for actually becoming a mother.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of this interesting, he wants the pretend of it, and perhaps really does want to belong in some way, because he does feel like he's been, neglected by his own mother, but then he does get kind of mad at Wendy for it. It's interesting.
Yeah. So I read, not in relation to this, but just as I was reading Barrie, the earlier novel, The Little White Bird, which was published 2 years before the play was produced, before the play Peter Pan was produced. And in The Little White Bird, there are a number of chapters in the middle that are a deal with the character of Peter Pan. It's his first introduction to the Peter Pan character. And I did want to point to that because there are some things that are interesting here that are touched upon again in our book that I think shed some light on some of what's going on with Peter Pan. So first of all, in the Little White Bird, he's said to be 1 week old. It says his age is 1 week, and though he was born so long ago, he has never had a birthday, nor is there the slightest chance of his ever having one. The reason is that he escaped from being a human when he was 7 days old. He escaped by the window and flew back to the Kensington Gardens. Well, obviously that won't match up with our Peter very well because our Peter's got to be quite a bit older than a week. But this 1-week-old Peter is able to have conversations and do all sorts of things like that. This is where we get the origin story of the fairies, which is inconsistently applied in our Peter Pan. But the incident that I really want to point to is Peter has run away from home and has been living with the fairies for a certain amount of time, not in Neverland, but in Kensington Gardens in the middle of London. And he decides that he misses his mother. And so he wants to go back to see her. And so he does. And the fairies tell him, oh, no, like they're we can let you fly to her house. We can give you the power to do that, but we can't open the door for you to get in. And he says, it's okay. The window that I flew out of will still be open. She'll keep it open for me. And when he goes back, it is open. And she's lying there sleeping in the chair, and his heart breaks when he sees her, and it breaks and fills with love. But he sits on the windowsill hesitating and doesn't go to her. And Barrie says, he says, why does he not do this? Why does he not tell his mother that he has come back? I quite shrink from the truth, which is that he sat there in two minds. Sometimes he looked longingly at his mother, and sometimes he looked longingly at the window. Certainly it would be pleasant to be her boy again, but on the other hand, what times those had been in the gardens. Was he so sure that he would enjoy wearing clothes again? And then this gets down a bit, and it says he decides to go back. And it says, you must not think that he mediated flying away and never coming back. He had quite decided to be his mother's boy, but he hesitated about beginning tonight. And so he goes back to the fairies, and he says his goodbye, and he takes kind of a long time about it. And when he comes back to the window, but the window was closed, and there were iron bars on it. And peering inside, he saw his mother sleeping peacefully with her arm round another little boy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is referred to in Peter Pan. He mentions, the story about going back and his mother's barred the window, but it's quite a bit more poignant in this earlier version.
And when it says that in the novel, I think that Barrie even has a little side comment of like, it wasn't quite how he remembered it or something like that. He
says, I'm not sure if this is true, but at least that's what Peter thought.
Yes.
Right. In the Little White Bird, it's really crazy because in Peter's mind, he's been replaced and his mother is so given to the new child that she's intentionally barring him out from getting in the way of this thing. And he has an argument later on in the next chapter with this other girl who's trying to convince to stay in the garden with him. And he tells her, yeah, your mother's going to get another baby. She's probably working on it right now. Like she's probably putting the bars on the window right now. And the other girl's like runs home to make she's so terrified. But of course, the mother isn't trying to replace Peter. She's trying not to lose the new child in the same way she lost the last one who flew out the window, right? But that's the tragedy that lies in the background of Peter's mind. And I like the way that Barrie says that he's not sure if it's true, but Peter believed it. That's all that really matters.
Right.
If you think that's what your mother did, then that's the defining trauma. And one of the things about trauma, right, is that in many ways, our psychological age gets arrested at the point where a massive trauma takes place. Mm-hmm. And so Peter is now caught at this age, which is the age of the trauma when he felt that his mother had betrayed him. And so a lot of the frantic need to have everything be his way and to be seen to be clever, which Barrie constantly laments his calling himself clever. You oughtn't to do that. He's trying to fill a gap in his life where his mother, he thinks, has said, you're not worth anything. You have no value. And I'm glad you're gone. I'm shutting you out. He's trying to fill that up. And I think if you read the character of Peter Pan without reference to that central tragedy, then you're really not set up to read him well. He is very much a tragic character, and all of his gaiety and his dancing and whatnot, like that's how he responds to tragedy. It's just his method of repression. When Wendy says she's going to go home and all the Lost Boys go with her, Peter runs around the house playing the pipe, pretending like he doesn't care. But of course, he cares very much.
Which is, again, a huge difference. I mean, you don't get this idea from most of the films or anything like that.
They take his joyfulness seriously. I think they take it at face value. It's like, yeah, this is really how he is. Like, he's actually happy. And, oh, the joys of being a child forever. How wonderful that would be. it's a choice that Peter won't go back on, but he won't go back on partly because he thinks there's something wrong with mothers. Right. And because he thinks his mothers, that's just what mothers do. Wendy's okay because Wendy's only playing mother, and Peter will play father with her, and that's fine because she's still young and so she's still trustworthy in a sense. But once Wendy has grown up and become a mother, Peter has no further use for her because now she's the kind of person, she has the kind of power that can hurt him.
I think there's some interesting notions of masculinity that kind of go along with this and with the character Peter that I'd like to delve into a little bit.
Yeah.
So 18th century, 19th century, you have, of course, the myth of the noble savage, which we've talked about some, what is sort of pure nature without the imposition of society. I think we talked about that when we read Rousseau a little bit, and the different ways that some philosophers conceptualize that. And so the romantics are saying basically society's the problem. We need to kind of get rid of the constraints of society. And so they favor a kind of manhood that would kind of be free from that. You have nothing to break but your chains, as Mark would say. In reaction to that, the Victorian sensibility was very much that masculinity was always about repressing the sort of baser instincts for duty. They would emphasize duty a lot. And you see this in Mr. Darling. Mr. Darling is the Victorian man.
Yes.
Because he's all about, he's reading the paper about the stocks and business and, these kind of things. And so he has sort of suppresses that desire, though at the end he kind of lets go because he adopts all these children, which he can't, it doesn't make sense dollars and cents wise, to do
That's
that.
right.
And he
was
knows
so concerned about paying for his original 3 children, and now all of a sudden he's going to take in 5 or 6 more.
That's right. And so within that, there is you kind of see the development of that arc because, I think by the time you get to Barrie, that was being kind of discarded. I mean, you could also look at literature like Jekyll and Hyde, for example, I think is a good kind of rebuttal to that version of masculinity. You can only suppress so far. And there's something deep down that you're suppressing that's kind of disturbing, from that perspective. And so some have argued, there was an article that I was reading that was arguing that maybe Peter fills in what's called the new imperial man. So kind of as that Victorian era was ending and Britain became the imperialist power that it was, they were kind of promoting a form of masculinity that was very aggressive, physically strong, in some ways retaining aspects of boyhood, right, that go unchecked in a way that mature into a kind of force. So there's a sense in which Peter kind of fits that. I mean, he is aggressive. He is always ready to have a fight. He's both cruel and seductive at the same time. He's also willing to swap places with Hook, who I think you could read as a kind of aristocratic masculinity, which would have been, I think, paired with the Victorian conception a little bit. But one author, I think her name was Garden, Gaarden, argues that Peter actually is sort of the escape from all of those models of masculinity, as a kind of protest almost of them. And I'm not actually sure, because as we've talked about, whatever Peter is, there's a kind of arrested development here that has real consequences, and that it hurts people. It sees others as things to be chewed up and spit out. Once he's done with you, and he doesn't even remember you. You know, I mean, that's like stripped of all humanity. I mean, it's because what makes us human is our relationships with other people, and I'm not me without you, and vice versa. And he just totally destroys that. And so and in some ways, I think it's kind of a warning, and one that I think might have some application culturally today. I mean, we talk a lot about masculinity and the problems with that, but also we talk about a kind of arrested development or a kind of prolonged adolescence, right? In which, people are 30 and they still don't have real responsibilities, no real jobs, no families, and things like that. And you kind of do get a sort of Peter Pan syndrome from that.
Yeah.
And so it's a good warning against something like that. And so Peter's not really a model, but he is maybe does speak to certain cultural trends that we see even today.
Yeah, you can see like right at the beginning when he and Tinker in the nursery looking for a shadow, when he finds it, he accidentally slams Tinkerbell in the drawer, and so she's shut up in the drawer.
Yeah.
And it's not any sort of malice on his part. It's just it's the symptom of his radical unconcern for anyone who's not Peter.
Thoughtlessness, weaponized thoughtlessness.
Yeah, that's right. And so even as he's flying, we mentioned this before, as he's flying with Wendy and the boys, he'll fly off because they're slow to have an adventure in the sky, and he'll come back and he won't even remember who they are. And there's one bit where it says he's flying by them and he's just on the verge of saying good day, which is what you say to a stranger as you pass them. And Wendy's like, Peter, it's me, it's Wendy. He's like, oh yeah, sorry, forgot about you for a second there. Yeah. So, but this also in this masculinity thing, you mentioned the Mr. Darling being a good example of this, this new imperial man. And what's fascinating is at the end, in penance for he shuts Nana in the kennel because of something that's entirely his own fault. And because of that, Nana's not there to protect the children when she needs to be there, even though she tries so hard to get out and to get back there in time and to get there with help. Such a faithful dog. Maybe dogs should be governesses. But he feels so bad about this that not only will he never shut Nana in the kennel again, but he says, I myself will stay in this kennel and I will not leave this kennel until the children come back, which in his mind is never going to happen. And so he has arranged for men to come and pick up the kennel every morning and take the kennel to his job with him in it. And he sits and works in this job. And this is, they put it on a handsome. And so everyone can see him in it. It's not very private. And this is celebrated. Everyone in the town, he becomes a big hero because people know why he's doing it. And they see him. And so it's this big gesture of, taking on duty to a super extreme. And to the point where Mrs. Darling is wondering, like, it is still quite a punishment, isn't it? I mean, you're not enjoying it, are you? To which his response was, how can you ask me that? And all the readers were like, quite naturally, actually.
It raises a whole new dimension of being in the doghouse. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so there is that. And then, of course, also throughout the ways that the possibilities that are there, the way that he talks about the mermaids, and Tiger Lily, and Wendy, there's a sense in which, if you're looking at this from a more contemporary gender perspective, there's a lot to be desired in the way that he portrays these women. It's a very conventional understanding of, a woman's place is in the home because that's where her heart is too. She doesn't really have any desires bigger than that. And so naturally you'll find her, gravitating to these things and whatnot.
This is a dimension of the story that gets kind of retold in modern adaptations, I think, is that kind of tension between sort of a pull to the domestic versus a pull towards a kind of nebulous freedom to do whatever. I think that comes out in modern retellings definitely more than Barrie does.
That's right. Wendy's, we don't know how old she is, but she's not terribly old. And right away, there's a boy in the nursery. You may kiss me if you like. Come sit a little closer, and all of this sort of a thing. Her mind is already bent on domestic things via the sexual route. And that's kind of strange. And of course, Peter, being no more than 6, doesn't understand at all what she's talking about.
Yeah, he doesn't know what a kiss is. And he's willing to play father, but it's clearly kind of placating her. It's not really, it's about kind of her approval, I think, more than anything else. Yeah.
I think if you asked him what he thought he was doing, he would say, I'm playing Wendy's game.
Yeah.
This is how she likes to play. And there's one point where Wendy asks him, and this is in the center of the chapter where you get the most detail about, they're pretending to be a couple and the lost boys are their children. And there's a bit where Peter's like, we're just pretending, right? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, okay, cool. And she's like, do you not want to do anything more for me than to pretend? And he's like, of course not. And then she gets mad and stalks across the other side of the room. And he's like, well, what's that about? And Tinkerbell from her little room is like, you idiot.
Yeah.
She wants what I want.
That's right. Yeah. Why? So that's a good question, I suppose. because you do see in Wendy and Tinkerbell and pretty much all of the female characters, there is this kind of romantic pull that is rooted in a sort of domestic, Barrie might call it a domestic nature. Why are they all attracted to him?
Right?
Because it seems like he's the opposite of what you would want. If that's your pull,
Yeah.
if you want to be a mother and you want to have children and all that, you want to settle down, Peter Pan is like the worst possible option for you.
Peter Pan, don't settle down.
No.
Yeah, that's right. And I wonder, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm gonna take a stab at it and see how this works. I'm gonna throw this at you. I wonder if it's because he is the center of everything, because he's the force that drives everything and makes things happen. And so even though he's not domestic in the sense that he will settle down and be dependable and provide for you in that sort of a way, there is something very fatherly about him, head of the household, I should say, about him, in this sense of no one's going to mess with him. Everybody does what he says. The world kind of bends to his will. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. What do you think?
Yeah, so I guess in that way, what we're saying is that Peter is actually, maybe in sort of his unrestraint, he is a kind of patriarch. Whereas Mr. Darling is willing to repress that in a way that's almost not, I hesitate to use the term because I don't mean it this way and I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but I think thinking in the way Barrie is writing, Mr. Darling's willingness to take on the penance and the way that he goes about it is almost feminine. But you would never get that from Peter. He is a sort of unbridled masculinity. Yeah,
he never humbles himself.
That's right.
I don't know about the feminine thing. I think that I would disagree with Gardner. I don't think that Barrie is necessarily trying to undercut images of masculinity so much as he's just kind of, he may be poking fun at certain of them, but he's not replacing them with something that's not another image of masculinity, right?
Correct. I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that being the case, maybe in Barrie's eyes, what's going on is Peter is kind of, in a sense, he's kind of the imperial masculine ideal blown up to extremist proportions, where the entire world has to submit to his will, and he's not allowed to. He does repress everything that is in any way counter to his will. One of the reasons he forgets, again, he can't form long-term memories, but this, if you put those two things together, you almost wind up with this claim that this colonial masculinity is a form of infantilism, because it's predicated upon the inability to progress beyond the earliest stages of desires and the repression and forgetting of anything that is uncomfortable for that might force you to have to see the world in a more complicated sort of way.
No, I like that. I think that makes sense. There is a kind of fragility that undergirds that. I mean, Peter would never admit that it's fragility, but he gets so uncomfortable and gets so angry when confronted with certain realities that I think that does make some sense.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting then, the fact that all the female characters want him shows that there's an attraction to that. And I think the attraction is the attraction of, he will take care of us. He can't be dependent upon to be around, but, he's that shield that me and the children can hide beneath, right? When your father comes home, he'll set all things to rights. That's sort of an idea.
That's right. Huh. Yeah, very interesting.
The other thing that I'd like to mention anyway, because I don't want it to go unnoticed, the character of Smee in the Disney movies is a lovable sidekick kind of character, and he's not half so wicked as Hook is. And you kind of feel like he's a man with a good heart who happens to have gotten attached to a bad leader. And this Smee in the book is an idiot. And you do get some of that, get lovable Smee, because when they capture all the boys, like none of the boys are afraid of Smee and they want to play with him and this other kind of a thing. But he's not lovable. He's not this innocent, nice pirate. It talks about him, killing people quite casually and pretty regularly, and he's pretty nasty. he doesn't understand why people don't take him more seriously as a threat, but he is in fact a very unpleasant character. And after the end of all things, he's one of the 2 pirates who escapes the bloodbath, and he goes around saying that he was the only pirate that James Hook ever feared, which is ridiculous. But that's still how he wants to be seen, right? So if you have any notions of poor lovable Smee, don't bring them to this text.
It's interesting because there is a moment in which Hook tries to figure out why anybody would like Smee. Towards the end of the book, once the Lost Boys are captured, it says, to tell poor Smee that they thought him lovable, Hook itched to do it, but it seemed too brutal. Instead, he revolved the mystery in his mind. Why do they find Smee lovable? He pursued the problem like the sleuth hound that he was. If Smee was lovable, what was it that made him so? A terrible answer suddenly presented itself. Good form.
Yeah.
Had the bosun good form without knowing it, which is the best form of all?
Back in the chapter "The Island Come True," chapter 5, when Smee is first introduced, it says they see one of the Lost Boys, and Smee says, "Shall I after him, Captain?" asked pathetic Smee, and tickle him with Johnny Corkscrew. Smee had pleasant names for everything, and his cutlass was Johnny Corkscrew because he wiggled it in the wound. It's pretty awful. Like, after he's killed you, he's then wiggling the knife around in your body. One could mention many lovable traits in Smee. For instance, after killing, it was his spectacles he wiped instead of his weapon. And that's a typical J. M. Barrie tongue-in-cheek, lovable. You'd probably put scare quotes around it in contemporary writing. But yeah, this is a bloodthirsty, heartless pirate. When Hook mentions the plan of we're going to bake a poison cake and leave it around for the kids to eat, and then they'll die, Smee is like, that's the most wicked plan I've ever heard of. I love it. Let's sing a song. Yep.
Smee it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Hook, I do want to maybe Hook is obsessed with good form.
Yeah.
Which I think ties back to that aristocratic notion.
Mm-hmm.
It's like his mind is obsessed with it. That's why Peter is bad. That's bad form to be cocky.
That's right.
But even as he's... Oh, go ahead.
The cockiness has been called out by the narrator all along. I'm afraid that Peter's thought very well of himself and this sort of a thing. So Peter's bad form has been called out as such all along, but this whole category of good form, bad form isn't introduced until Hook's last chapter, essentially.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it takes over, and that's all Hook is thinking about. And it's all starts with this story that Hook had been educated at the very best of schools, right? I think it might even said he's an Eton boy. And so he's picked up on all of these things from that. It feels like a non sequitur that all of a sudden all this talk about form when there hadn't been any of it before with Hook. But I think you're absolutely right to connect it to it's explaining particularly why Peter's cockiness should affect him the way that it does.
He even kind of dies. Hook dies with the good form, bad form thing going on in his mind.
Yes,
which is interesting because when the Lost Boys are about to be killed, Wendy's, they bring Wendy out and they let the mother have the last words to the sons, and all she says is, "We hope our sons will die like English gentlemen," which is good form. Right.
Right.
But then in his obsession with that good form, bad form, Hook it really kind of has bad form.
Yeah. It drives him crazy whenever he sees good form in another.
Yeah.
Because he's afraid he doesn't have it.
I'm sure a lot could be said about that, but that does seem like one of the great pitfalls of sort of aristocratic culture, right? Is that kind of constant navel gazing of like the absolute ridiculousness because of this obsession with good form, bad form, and also a kind of another kind of, I guess, dehumanizing mode, right? I mean, maybe it's not quite as bad as Peter's power projections, but it's not a good way to exist, as you can see with Hook.
That's right. The thing that I had remembered from reading this before that's stuck in my mind, blazoned, was that moment when Peter makes a gaffe at the end, and Hook, and very contentedly says "bad form" and throws himself to his death. That stuck with me. And so as I was reading that chapter, the other detail, I hadn't remembered this before, but as soon as it started happening, I remembered it very clearly, was slightly counting off the pirates as Peter killed them. And so
Yes.
he's like, a pirate goes into the cabin, doesn't come back out, and slightly's like, one. And it's the sort of like, there's something deliciously subtle and humorous and perfect about it that really stuck with me. So as soon as slightly started counting, I was like, this is the one that I've read before. And
Yes.
yeah.
Again, another thing you don't see in the movies. The kids counting how many pirates are killed.
Well, because they can't actually kill the pirates in the movie, right? I mean, even in the inn, Hook is thrown to the crocodile, and we see him running away from the crocodile off into the sunset as the crocodile continually is biting him, but he's not dying, right? And that's our last image of Hook in the Disney movie, because it's Disney, you know. There's only we can't show death, and that's another major difference. If you're thinking, "Ooh, I love the Disney movie. I bet the book will be great for my kids." This is why we're warning you. There's a very different sense here of what's appropriate for kids and what's not.
That's true.
There's no concern about death and killing potentially being unsuitable for kids. I'm not arguing whether death and killing are unsuitable for kids. I'm just pointing out that you need to know that it's in this book before you read it to your kids.
It would definitely strike many modern readers as odd, I think, for to market it towards children with that stuff in it. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because obviously one of the and there's a sense in which these two frames are maybe related, but the big, I think in the Disney movie and then in the later film adaptations, the sort of main tension is between youth and growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly that aspect of the book. I mean, Peter won't grow up. He is always a boy. But it seems to me the deeper kind of tension is between death and life. That Peter sort of refuses to die. And Hook is kind of running away from death. I mean, the tick-tock of the crocodile is like, you know, time kind of chasing him, and eventually it catches up to him, and he can't outrun it anymore, you know. But it seems like that's a dimension of the story that we don't talk about very much when we talk about Peter Pan in modern discussions, which makes it, I think, a great book, or one of the reasons why it's a great book is because that question of how do we prepare for death or how do we engage with death is kind of fundamental to the human condition. And so for that reason, I found it to be very interesting and felt a little bit, I guess, maybe cheated by the modern retellings that don't really play on that. Like I'm thinking the one live film adaptation that came out in the early to mid 2000s, the father is Hook. Mr. Darling is Hook. Right. And so it's like Hook is kind of that part of him that he is, you know, pursuing business and things like that and all that. But I think that totally misunderstands Hook's main issue, which is he doesn't want to die. Yeah. Which is bad form, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
Good form is accepting that you'll die and dying like an English gentleman.
That's a good way. That's a good connection because, of course, you know, way back fairly early in the Western tradition, Socrates made the whole point of philosophy melite thanatou, right? Preparation for death, living towards death. And it became all about dying well. And of course, even before Socrates did it, I mean, wasn't that in many ways the point of the epics? It was, if you're going to leave behind lasting fame, yes, it's about doing great deeds before you die, but it's also in a sense about how you die. And it's kind of a lot of the people in the Trojan War, they may not have much to boast about, but they can boast that they were killed by Achilles. Yep. And so, you know, it's kind of one of these is like, well, you know, the greatest warrior of all time killed me, so I could be the second greatest warrior for all you know, right? Because that opens up that whole realm of things. I got beat by Pete Sampras, so I mean, I could still be a much better player than you, right? Yep. Yes, so there is that. And of course, Peter Pan and Hook are both fleeing death in their different ways. Hook by trying to artificially stay in the adult powerful form forever. Peter by refusing to progress to the next stage that naturally comes along. And then on the other side of those, I would set Wendy, who very natural. She never entertains not going home. She becomes very alarmed when John and Michael forget their parents. And so she sets a test for them every night to ask about their parents, try to keep the memory alive of what their parents were like. And yeah, she's forgetting a bit. She puts the test in the past tense. What was father's hair color? But that's not intention. It's not indicative of a decision not to go back. She always thought about going back. And when it becomes clear that there was any potential danger in not going back soon enough, she's immediately like, well, we have to go back right now and get this. We have to get home. And so even though Peter says that she promised him that she wouldn't grow up, that unless I'm misremembering, that happened off screen, right? Like we never see her say that to him. I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't think
saying
so.
it anyway.
Yeah.
But I don't think that she could have said that genuinely, because I think she always did intend to grow up. And even while they're together, what's she doing? She's playing at being grown up, right? Peter's games are the way he wants to live life. Her game is also the way she wants to live life, and it's very different than his. And so when she grows up and becomes a mother, and there's no sense of tragedy about that for her, and then she goes on to become a grandmother, and then is presumably passed by the end of the story, and we see that Mrs. Darling is safely dead and out of the way at a certain point in the story. There is a naturalness to it, but not just a naturalness, also a rightness, right? And so Wendy is able, unlike Hook or Peter, Wendy is able to live life to the full because she lives all of life, whereas they want to live life up to a certain point and then not do the bit that comes next.
That's right. That's right. For this reason, I think that it's really interesting to see the story in conversation with one of the Greek myths, particularly the myth of the abduction of Persephone. Which, for listeners who don't know, Persephone was this kind of beautiful young girl. Her mother, Demeter, was protective, wouldn't let her marry Hades, and so Zeus basically allows Hades to abduct Persephone and take her to the underworld, where she becomes sort of the queen of the underworld and is married to him. But she is allowed, I think, to go back sometimes, right?
So she's if she fulfills a certain amount of time in the underworld without eating anything, then she can go back. But she eats 6 pomegranate seeds, and so she's got to spend 6 months of the year in the underworld and 6 months of the year back in the surface world.
Right. Which is funny because, so if you think about then how are some ways that there's a parallel to the Peter Pan story, Wendy is abducted, taken to not only Neverland, but she actually lives under the ground with the boys.
Yeah.
And if you think about their food, they're often pretend eating, right? They never actually really eat. They pretend to eat. And so, I don't know. There are just lots of little things about that, which then
and at the end, the deal with Wendy's mother is that Peter can take Wendy back 1 week out of the year for spring cleaning. And that's sort of like Persephone's continual having to return to the underworld.
That's right. That's exactly it. And so for those reasons, I think it also kind of confronts us with that question of mortality. Once you see those connections, I think it makes a lot more sense of the story.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's really good. The Persephone myth is often taken to be an explanation of the change of the seasons. Because Persephone represents spring, and so she's got to go into the ground and this sort of a thing. It's really interesting and if we're going to continue pushing that analogy, then the Wendy story, it does represent something of the place of fantasy and make-believe in our lives, that Wendy, although she is committed to growing up and living the adult life, she doesn't want to lose it entirely. And so she waits dutifully for Peter. Now, that said, Peter comes, I think it's that he comes the first year, and then he misses the second year, and comes the third year, and then he misses like 20 years, and she's got a baby, a kid who's the age she was originally, and Peter comes back, and Peter's unaware that he's missed like 20 years worth of appointments, and he's just like, okay, ready to go, and so there's a sense in which she wants to hold on to the fantasy and keep that as a part of the rhythm of life, but not because she neglects it, but because it neglects her. It doesn't become a part of her life, and then she grows out of it.
She grows out of it, but she recognizes the importance of it and passes it along to her daughter, right? She allows the daughter to go.
Yes, and then her daughter winds up allowing her daughter to go, and it becomes this whole tradition that the daughters in the Wendy line go to do the spring cleaning. And Peter Pan seems to consider them largely interchangeable, precisely because he doesn't remember things very long anyway, and so he probably isn't even aware at some point that Wendy's daughter, was it Mabel, that she's not Wendy.
And I think you can see a kind of negative of this in The Last Battle, right? Because out of the 4 children who go during the Chronicles in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to Narnia, Susan doesn't go to Narnia in The Last Battle because she's too grown up.
Yeah.
She's forgotten about it. She doesn't care about it. She doesn't want to. So in a way, she could learn something from Wendy, perhaps, who's willing to allow her daughter to go and sees that as a good thing.
Yeah, there was something else in here that reminded that I was like, "Ooh, I think Lewis was thinking about that when he was writing Narnia." I can't remember what it was, but there was something there that stuck with me. So, listeners, if you haven't read this yet and you're on your list, as you're reading through, look for places where you think Lewis might have been thinking about this book when he was writing Narnia.
Or if you're an English major and you're looking for a paper to write, there you go.
That. Yeah, I think we've demonstrated you can write some pretty good papers about Peter Pan.
I think so.
As we start to wind down here, I want to take a moment because I am very unusual in that I've read other books by Barrie than Peter Pan. And like I said, the reason that I picked this was because I'd read some other stuff and was really impressed with his writing. And I thought, oh man, like Barrie's an overlooked genius. We've got to get this guy back out there. And so I picked Peter Pan, expecting it to be the same level as the other books that I've read. And it really isn't. I was very disappointed in the prose of this text, because it is several levels below what I encountered in the novel and the play of his that I read. And so I stand by my claim that Barrie is a writer of the first rate who deserves to be ranked among the top writers of the late 19th, early 20th century. But Peter Pan is not evidence of it.
Do you think that's because he was revising this constantly?
I don't.
Okay.
I think his revising it constantly is a symptom and not a cause. I think it's a symptom. He knew he wasn't getting what he wanted to do. I think the problem is, it seems to me that he fell prey to doing exactly what Lewis said he did not do, which is writing down to children. The other stories are not for children really in any discernible way. And they are, I mean, it's just genius. Here, a lot of the complaints that I have stem from, the narrative gets off base. He follows these strange ways. He keeps himself from using his full literary powers. There are phrases and expressions in here, moments of flashes of what you will see in his other writings, but it seems to be intentionally dumbed down because of it's being written for children. And I think that's what it was. He couldn't ever figure out how to write as well for children as he could write for adults. So it's really fascinating that then this became his most famous work by a country mile. It's pretty much the only thing of him that anybody reads anymore, to the extent that he is read. When it's kind of, I haven't read absolutely everything he's written yet, but from what I've seen so far, it's kind of the failure of all of his works.
Interesting. So why do you think this is the one that endures?
I think it's because he really taps into, it's because of the stuff we were talking about, this relationship to death and this holding back from death, this understanding of what does it mean to be a man versus a boy, and all of those things, even the Neverland as a proxy for what's valuable about childhood that we wind up losing as we grow old. I think all of those things, coming as they did in the beginning of the 20th century, were addressing a peculiar ache in modernist man that caused it to really resonate.
Interesting. So a lot of those themes then are absent from the other works that you've read?
They're not there in the same way. They're there in much more poignant ways.
I see.
Yeah. I don't doubt a great part of it isn't just historical accident. That this has gotten picked up. I would never have picked up any Barrie if Disney hadn't made the Peter Pan movie. Right. I would never have discovered the rest of Barrie if I hadn't been looking for books with fairies in them and come across his play Dear Brutus, which we'll return to in my endnote. And that was a revelation. But so I think in many ways, even though it's a failure to my mind, as a writer attempting to transpose his powers to writing for children, nevertheless, it connected with children and it connected with adults through their childlikeness. And that was what allowed it to endure at least long enough for Disney to make it into a movie that would then spread the story that much further.
Yeah, it makes for an interesting. I guess we talk about this a lot with this podcast. I think just in terms of these great works and how this is all part of a conversation. And so while it's certainly true that there are a lot of differences between the various adaptations of it and the book, the fact that it is so pervasive and that it has been adapted so much makes this conversation even more interesting and more layered. And it in some ways contributes to the story, because I agree with you that I don't think, just from a literary perspective, this was an amazing read.
Right.
I do think the questions that are being asked and the things at the heart of the story are really interesting. And so the fact that generations continue to revisit it and retell it and change it and wrestle with it kind of proves the point of why the canon is so important to begin with.
Yeah, that's right. It's certainly part of the conversation, and not every book that's part of the conversation is one of the best things ever written. But even apart from being one of the best things ever written, they often contribute indispensable things to the conversation, and that in itself may be enough to make them worth being read. This is not a bad book.
No.
It's just not as good as anything else he's written, as far as I can tell.
Even having not read other things he wrote, I just picked it up with a certain expectation in terms of quality and was a little disappointed in the result. But not that I'm sad I read it or anything. I rank it higher than some of the other books we've read this season.
looking at you, Nietzsche.
In fact, there you go. There's another English lit paper for you. Is like Peter Pan as the Uberman, So
that's funny.
Good. Well, should we talk about our endnotes?
Yes, let's. You go first.
Okay. Well, mine are going to be kind of simple, I suppose. Which are, I think both of us would probably endorse Finding Neverland, the movie with Johnny Depp in it. I thought that was a really wonderful and lovely movie.
Oh, good. I cry every time I watch it.
Yeah. So I think if you have not seen that, read the book and then go watch the movie. And then the other is, you mentioned it earlier, is Hook with Robin Williams. I think I remember seeing that as a very little child and always kind of enjoyed that particular telling of it. Like I said, there are definitely differences between that and the book, but I think it's just so lovely, and Robin Williams was just such a talented comedian, and so I really, really love that movie. Maybe that's more nostalgia than anything else, but those are kind of my two endnotes. So
no, those are really good, and I would have added Finding Neverland to my list if you hadn't said it, which is why I asked you to go first. But I was pretty confident it was going to be on your list. That is such a good. I mean, in a sense, even if this were a terrible book, it would be worth it for giving us that film.
Yep.
But my endnote is J.M. Barrie's play Dear Brutus, which was the Barrie that led me back to Barrie. It's the reason that we're reading this now. And it's a play, but it's a play that I've spoken with some theater people about this. I was like, I don't know how you could stage this play, because so much information is happening in the stage directions that would be very, very difficult to convey with the requisite specificity if you had to convey it only visually. I really feel like it's a play that was meant to be read more than to be performed, which is fortuitous for you because no one plays it ever. Although I've been unveiling upon my theater friends to put on a production of it. I'd love to see how they would manage it, but it is very, very serious, and it's asking a question about could have beens and what difference could have beens really make to who we are. And so it's asking a very deep philosophical question about the role of fate versus the role of choice. But the fate its question is not so much a cosmic fate that's working on you from the outside, but the fate of your, that's determined by your nature, which is in effect up to your choices and whatnot. It's really funny. And it punches really hard when it punches. And so I would bring tissues. I'd be prepared for a fair amount of self-examination as it goes through, and yet the whole thing can be read in a couple of hours. So Dear Brutus, cannot recommend it highly enough. It's a masterpiece of 20th century theater.
Excellent. I'll have to check it out. My brother-in-law is an actor there where you live in Memphis, Tennessee. So maybe Yeah, maybe
Dude.
you should talk to him about doing it.
Yes, right. And then I could be like a consultant on the production.
There we go. Perfect. We could, endorsed by the classical mind.
That's right.
That'll really bring out the crowds. So.
That'll push it over the top right there.
That's right. Well, good. Well, that's certainly something I'm going to be adding to my list because that sounds very fascinating. Well, I think our next book. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, listeners. Next up, one of the heavies, Virgil's Aeneid.
Yeah, that'll be that. I'm very excited to read that to you, and I think at this point the only kind of major epic from that period would be well, not that period, but in that kind of cycle would be the Odyssey. We've not done the Odyssey, but we've done the Iliad. We'll have done the Aeneid, so that's 66%. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. That puts the Odyssey on the chopping block for being picked one of these times soon, but we'll keep that in mind. But yeah, no, this. I mean, the Aeneid is as big a boy as there is in terms of Western literature and its influence and all of that. As a key piece of transmission from Rome, from Greece to us through Rome, all of these types of things. What does it look like to craft a national mythos? We will not have half as much time, 10th as much time as it would take to really discuss it well. But we're looking forward to sharing some highlights with you.
Yes, I can't wait for that one. And then our August book will be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So I'm excited for that one as well. I think, in fact, I think they're making a new film of that. So I think that'll be a fun one to kind of do at that time. So yeah, those are our next two books. And then we will at some point in the next couple months as well be releasing an episode where we kind of go through the next season of books and explain our rationale for picking the books that we have. And so, I'm excited. Lots of good books.
Very good.
All right, listeners. Well, thank you for listening. And in the meantime, keep reading.